And welcome back. We're going to be spending the next few segments with our legal panel via Zoom, of course. And let's start by introducing the guys. Starting at the top, you got James Kousouros, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. Right underneath him, Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett, PLLC, and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Doug Von Oiste, there at the bottom, founding partner of Karsten Von Oiste, focusing on corporate misconduct, and was selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. All right, guys, let's first jump right into COVID as it relates to the vaccine. And at the top of the show, we discussed the politics surrounding this thing and the logistical challenges when it comes to distributing it. But there's a host of legal issues involved. Now, I know you can't have a government mandate to force people to get a shot, but can people who don't get inoculated get banned from things like public transportation or going to a game? Or how about going to school? Already, you got many areas have weighed in on the last one, but they're all over the place. Tennessee saying it's going to be optional for students. Pennsylvania saying won't be required. New Mexico saying it's considering making it mandatory. And a bioethicist at NYU spoke to USA Today and had this to add, quote, "It's much more likely that a private organization or a company will require you to be vaccinated to get a certain access to places. People, they worry about the president, the governor, or county executive telling them what to do. I don't think that is going to happen. But what about the workplace? And can employers keep their workers home if they don't get shots? Could certainly, I think, get tricky. Many polls have people reluctant to get it. Take a look at the FDNY and New York City firefighters. They're asked whether or not they'd get the vaccine. And take a look at these numbers here. 55% said they would not. And let me start off with you, Jimmy, on this one. Most employees in this country are at will. And by definition, an at-will employee is just that. You can't discriminate based off of race, ethnicity, gender, etc. But you can fire somebody basically without cause. And if a workplace says, you know, customers are going to come in my door more likely than if I have a inoculated worker, I could see this definitely happening. Start in the workplace. I think it's very feasible. A lot of places are going to require people to be vaccinated if they want to get a check.
Well, you know, the vaccines right now are only approved for emergency use. And there are still a lot of questions surrounding, you know, their ultimate efficacy and any side effects and so on and so forth. I'm not so sure that such a mandate from a private employer would be legal. You are at cause and you can be fired for any reason, but it cannot be a discriminatory reason. And I don't know whether or not separating your employees who are willing to take a vaccine from those who aren't willing to take a vaccine would be upheld at this point, given the emergency use authorization that's in place. You know, listen, it's very difficult. We don't know whether or not these vaccines are ultimately going to be effective, whether they are going to have significant side effects. We don't even know how long the immunity will last. So I think that at this early stage, I'm not so sure that any such mandate would be upheld.
You know, Mayo, though, our kids all had to be vaccinated before they went to school. And I know we're at the earlier stages of this right now, but at some point, you know, you got to jump in. So I believe, you know, many schools are going to say, hey, just like the measles, you got to get the vaccination for COVID, especially if we want to get back to in-person learning and all the consequences and concerns, even for adults at the head of the class. So if we can do it for schools, why can't we do it more broadly?
I think that you can do it more broadly. I think that it's going to be an interesting balancing act, and that's going to be something that's going to require the employers, number one, to determine how they're going to be perceived by their clientele, but also they have an obligation to protect their other employees. So if they can show that there's a compelling safety issue and that there's a compelling business interest, I think that they're going to be allowed to do so. Now, again, going back to Jim's point, how do you articulate that it's a compelling interest, and how do you articulate that the vaccine is going to further that compelling interest or further that interest in the safety and well-being of your fellow employees? That's going to be the hurdle.
You know, Mayo, if you're a frontline worker, let's say you work in a hospital or something, I can see that being a requirement. I just mentioned a poll, firefighters, 55% of them in New York City say they won't. They're obviously first responders. They're on the front lines meeting people every day in response to obviously tragedies. So can we require cops and firefighters or EMT workers? Can we assume that those folks, when they come, they're going to be required to have taken the vaccine?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because right now, if you go back to what was happening in nursing homes at the beginning of the pandemic, it suggested that inaction on the part of the nursing homes largely was attributable to the spread. You do have in some locales, in some states, you have people who are COVID positive who are required to work at the hospitals and to show up because of shortfall in terms of medical professionals. So you have to look at what's the liability there in terms of providing services to people, and if you transmit or approximately transmitted the virus to others, how are you opening yourself up and the business to liability? But the bigger thing is that the state will be able to regulate it, and if the state finds that there's a compelling interest that furthers the public health, then in all likelihood they'll be able to do it. Now, on a practical purpose, though, it's going to be very difficult to implement, because you can't realistically swap out 55% of your firefighters and expect to replace them with people who are able to hit the ground running. Same for police, same for your nurses, EMTs. It's going to be a very, very difficult thing to implement.
Doug, you and I have threatened over the years that we're going to go watch collegiate wrestling championships one time. So let's do a hypothetical that in Iowa they're going to have these championships. If we get on a plane, does the plane have a right to say, you're not boarding here until you show me proof of inoculation? To walk into the arena, do they have a right to say, you can't come in here unless you show me that you've gotten the vaccine? Or a hotel refuse me service and you if we haven't proven we've taken the shot?
You know, Rich, when you think about this problem, you first started with airplanes, and that's controlled. That there's a federal control over airplanes, so that's something different. You know, we go through the scenarios, but for the most part, you're going to find that if it's a private entity, they can control their workplace, the venue that they're in charge of. The bigger question is going to be when the government comes and says, we're not going to allow you to get public benefits of some sort unless you take the vaccine. And this is going to quickly become a constitutional question, whether you have a fundamental right not to take a vaccine. It's going to be very difficult for people to make that argument right now. And that's something that you're going to need to factually flesh out and become something that's going to be seen in the courts pretty soon.
All right, stay with me. When we come back, COVID obviously wreaking havoc on the entire criminal justice system as trials canceled, officials struggling to conduct business via Zoom. But can you have a jury trial if 12 people can't even be in the same room? It's just one of the litany of challenges that we're going to have to get into after this quick commercial break. Stay with us.